Hello and welcome to the conversation. I'm Kelly, the head of product marketing for Tines, and I'm excited to be sitting down here with Lucas Cantor, IT systems engineer at Intercom. Lucas and I had the pleasure of meeting last fall, I think it was, for a case study about Intercom, and we enjoyed the conversation so much that we decided we wanted to have it live again with y'all and share a bit more about how Lucas and the Intercom team were able to really develop a IT automation center of excellence. But before we get stuck into all the goods of that story, I'll let you introduce yourself, Lucas.
Thank you so much. As Kelly said, I'm Lucas Cantor. I'm a staff engineer on the IT infrastructure team here at Intercom, and we use Tines as what we call our business process automation platform. So not just for IT, but to provide a platform for the entire company throughout Intercom to automate their processes, and we've really been enjoying it. I'm glad to be here today to talk about it.
Yeah, excited for everyone to get to hear your story. Probably to kick things off, I find it really interesting to hear how different people describe Tines to the different teams in their organization or sharing within even their own team what we do or what you're doing with us. Can you quickly describe for folks on the call what Tines is in your mind for your team?
Sure. Yeah. So in my mind, as I alluded to before, obviously I kind of have two roles, right? So I use Tines as a builder because our IT team enjoys using it to automate our own processes, but we also see Tines, from the admin side of things. So we build it out as a platform that is robust and secure and reliable for the rest of the company to use. And so there are a lot of priorities that I have that are different depending on which perspective I'm coming from, for sure. And Tines allows it to be, very trivial for us to align those priorities regardless of which perspective.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you for that. And I remember when we were first talking, you guys obviously moved over from a different platform before you had automation in place. But that first call you had with us, with our solutions engineer, you had a workflow that you'd been working on for like 2 months, right? And you were able to build that in about 2 hours with us. Can you tell the team a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think assuming we're talking about the same flow here, because we were building a lot all at the same time, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think this was probably one of the ones where before, I guess I'll just say we're using Workato, which frankly is great and they have a great reputation. But they definitely, I would say they prioritize attacking things from like a chatbot first perspective, which I think works well in a lot of circumstances, but for our automations, it perhaps wasn't ideal. And with Tines offering Tines pages, I think we were able to really sort of shift the perspective of the way we built this automation. And it just drastically simplified it both for the builders, but as well as for the users, because when you're using a chatbot, even as an end user, you kind of have to know the correct incantation, right? Like to say
Right.
something to it. Whereas when you look at a web page, like everything, what you see is what you get. Literally, it's right in front of you in plain English. So
Yeah. Yeah, those pages is probably one of my favorite features in Tines. Like as a less technical user, you can just do so much more
yeah.
through a page than you can when you're having to configure a chatbot. And so then after the POC, obviously you chose Tines and it's been a great experience so far. But what was it like before that? Like when you were using Workato, we all know Workato's a leader
Yeah.
in the space. Um, and just what was different? Like what maybe was more complicated there and is less complicated here? I know you talked about pages, but yeah, how are you managing those requests that were coming into you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were definitely two main considerations that we had in mind when we were moving away from Mercado to Times. And one of them, I think, for me as an engineer, I prioritized personally a little bit more, which was the change control system, because I was effectively responsible for maintaining like a self-managed change control system for Workato. Um, and we were sort of early adopters of that, and it was very mm, finicky, maybe isn't the right word, but just, it was fragile perhaps. So I had to constantly babysit it and make sure it was working properly. Whereas with Times, like it's just a first-class native feature built into the platform, and I can literally never think about it again once I configure it the way I want it, which is awesome. And then the other consideration probably that was top of mind for us was just the cost model. Um, so again, there maybe are different priorities depending on different use cases for all of these platforms. But for us, we found that before we moved to Tines, IT was kind of forced to be the arbiter of like whether somebody's task deserved an automation, because we had to worry about the cost that we would incur just to automate something.
Yeah.
And we don't want to get in between the builders and what they're trying to build, right? Like they know best about their team's processes. So we want to just give them free reign, obviously, like with set up some reasonable constraints and make it safe, but then let them, run wild and automate what they want.
Yeah.
And we found we couldn't do that before because we're always worried about cost. But with Tines, just the cost model worked differently, and it aligned more closely with, our philosophy of building in general.
Right. Because at Intercom, like you're saying, you're trying to make it where more members of the organization are able to actually come in and build, and you're not
Yeah,
necessarily holding the reins there.
exactly. Yeah, we're trying to definitely foster this culture of builders. We even sort of tongue in cheek, but kind of not. We call this our no code as code program.
Yeah.
And we want to, like I said, set up this platform in times where people can, quote unquote, for free, get all of the engineering best practices that we might take for granted as engineers who work, in code, quote unquote, every day. Um, so, they get, change management, versioning, reverting to known good versions, like all of our infrastructure as code best practices that when we code with other coding languages, they get all of that for free in times as well.
Yeah. And how did you go about bringing those different teams into the product? How did you talk to them to get them interested? I mean, a lot of folks are engineers and they don't really want to
Yeah.
walk away from code.
Um, well, I mean, there was already an appetite for automation, and we could see that. I mean, people refer to this as like shadow IT sometimes. So there were already, even before we were on Workato, we had like other non-managed platforms like Zapier, for example, where people were building things because to them, like, they had a task and they were just going to follow the path of least friction to get that task done. And so I think that's sort of necessary, but not sufficient, right? You have to have that pent up demand, but then you also have to have a healthy culture of doing things the right way. And so the alignment, that we can find with Tines is the ability to make the easy way the right way, right? So
Right.
we can entice them, kind of look how much easier this is to do with Tines. Like they don't care that it's also more secure and follows all these engineering best practices. Like they just want to get their job done. But it's great when like everybody wins.
Yeah. I love how you said that. Yeah, exactly. They don't even know that it's secure and it's doing all these things. It's just helping them get their job done.
Yeah.
So did you guys do any type of internal roadshow or anything like that to get them excited? Or was it mostly just like, here's a product, see what we did with it and you can do it too?
Yeah, we have and this is just sort of again part of Intercom's culture of I forget what we call this. I think like ship to learn maybe it might fall under, but we have a program called Show and Tell where every week, and we literally just actually had this week right before this call happened,
Oh, nice.
where every week people demonstrate something that they have built. And there's no like strict requirements like how technical or complicated or big it is. It's all like it could be a beta, rough around the edges. Like you don't even need slides. You might just be sharing your screen and showing something you built. So we demonstrated some stuff that we built on Tines and showed how easy it was. And we also showed the effective net benefit for the end users, right? They're like, because we use Tines, not only was our job so much easier to build this automation, but look, now everybody else in the company can use this tool, like because we built, I think this was a Tines page, for example. So we built something for anybody to go to that Tines page and then make their life easier.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love those. I feel like I've heard that from a few of our customers too, where they've gotten to a point where they're able to just do these, yeah, like show and tells, like you're saying, and say like, here, look, experience it on the one side, and then also pull it through and go look and see how we built it on the back end,
Yeah.
which is really neat that y'all are doing that and seeing a lot of success with it too. But you're still an engineer, so how do you ensure you and your engineering colleagues are still getting to do what you want and enjoy doing it?
Yeah. To be honest, I kind of think about this question the other way around because engineers, their time and bandwidth is like a limited resource. And the entire reason that we're using the platform like this is so that they're not the bottleneck. And so in a way, Tines is actually freeing up engineers to work more on the like very technical work that they might have not been able to because they've been forced to automate something else for a different team. So now that their time is freed up, they can use Tines to do things that are highly technical, maybe that they couldn't before. And one recent example for the IT team of this was how we actually use Tines to integrate at a very low level, like for database management. So in the Tines story builder itself, again, it's so that same very straightforward dragging and dropping of the actions, but like under the hood, we're getting very raw, low level, like SQL query stuff going on. Like it's really impressive, and we're really pushing it to the limit, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. How do you mean you're pushing it to the limit? So within your team, or just even Tines pushing Tines to the limit?
Um, I'm not just my team. I think there are several teams that are using Tines in a way, and I think maybe another way to phrase this would be like, um, you know, so I wouldn't say like Tines can't do this, but this is an example of where we've, been very bleeding edge and like taken Tines as far as it can go, and then we've partnered with Tines to, you know, help us sort of get more out of it. So we just had a call recently with several engineers and product managers and our account manager around like how we can just process more events than Tines is even used to seeing, because like that's really what our builders want. It's just like even more of that. So like they're hitting the limits. And again, maybe that's not a good thing, but
Maybe it's
yeah.
outside of the realm of like our existing use cases of like how people have used Tines. You're doing it in a way that hasn't been used before. So we're just having to maybe iterate on our product
Yeah,
so that
yeah, and that's the thing.
yeah.
Is Tines is like super receptive. Like when we show these new use cases, like you guys are eager to, okay, like we can build on top of what we already have to make this work for you, and you have, which has
Yeah.
been amazing.
Yeah. You guys have been a big part of, I think, a lot of how we've iterated on not only some of the usability bits, I guess, but also I think really in that change control and change management space, because
Yeah,
so many teams who we haven't necessarily had a huge customer base from before are using the product and are used to those types of commits or those types of regulations. That's been one of
right.
the things, right? You guys were the key people in that, I feel like.
Yeah, that was one of the sort of deciding factors for us to start using Tines, was the ability to enforce that as a policy worldwide. Um, and then in addition to just change control as policy, there's other things that are surrounding that, like custom role management, for example. Because we have to be able to provision people in a very granular permission matrix of like, well, you're allowed to edit stories, but you can't necessarily approve changes or override the approval request requirement. Like and yeah, there's been a lot of flexibility there and growth in the platform.
Yeah. It's interesting as like you have more people in the product itself, how that need for that granularity and how it differs so much from like how you might need it versus a different customer. And so those types of customer roles are essential, I feel like. So it's been a really cool evolution. What's an area you've been particularly keen for us to iterate on?
Honestly, it's frankly what we literally just discussed, is like figuring out how we can use Tines to execute even more events more frequently, as well as getting even more granular with the custom permissions matrix of all the role-based access.
Yeah.
Those are, I think, the two things that have been most top of mind recently, but there's been lots of stuff that we have prioritized in the past that has been done, which is what I was going to talk about next. Is the change control policy didn't exist initially, but you built that for us effectively. Custom roles also didn't exist. You built that for us. Skim user provisioning is actually really big for us. That's important because we want Okta to be, the authoritative source of truth in terms of who's authorized to access what role. Sure.
That's how the product's evolved over the last year. And then what's been the most unexpected, like what would you say is the most unexpected way you guys have used the product, or an unexpected feature where you're getting added benefit?
Well, the unexpected feature I think that took me most by surprise, like I say as a nerd, kind of would be the curl to tines. And I know that's such a tiny little thing, but when I saw it, it was just so delightful. And because there are so many, API documentation libraries out there where you'll have curl examples of how to use their API, and you don't need Tines to have this pre-built custom bespoke integration for that one vendor. Like you can just copy and paste a curl command into a Tines story and it's done. That was so cool. But an unexpected way in which we've used it. Again, this is probably like this may be a good example of like what Tines itself didn't have in mind when they built the platform, but a way that we've used it is we've used it to expand on capabilities of other core tools that we use in our environment, like even Google Workspace, for example. We have very strict security policies around OAuth integrations for our Google Workspace environment, which is probably not surprising. But occasionally, if we want to allow list, an OAuth client to integrate with our Google Workspace, it'll make sense for us to allow it, but only for specific users. But Google doesn't let you do that. They only allow you to allow list it either for the whole company or maybe for org units, but you can't get as granular as like users or groups. So we built a Tines story that I think it just ingests like a webhook from the Google security logs of auth grants, and then it compares them against authorizations in Okta. And if somebody's not been authorized, it revokes that OAuth token effectively immediately, and then it slacks them. And again, it helps people self-solve. It sends them a link to where they can go to request basically that they be added to the allow list of users who can make that integration. So it's not like strictly a security incident. I mean, it is definitely security related for sure.
Right. Right.
But
But
yeah,
it's
it's very IT, dev, SecOps, like all in one.
yeah, and it's interacting with so many systems. That's really cool. What do you have others like that where you've gone outside the traditional Tinesy security space?
Yeah, I would say definitely the biggest, most complicated story that we built that I think was most technically impressive that was not like a traditional security application would be employee lifecycle management. So we obviously have Workday, right? That's our HR authoritative source of truth. And we have Okta, which is the identity and access management single sign-on authorization tool. And while they do have a native integration between them, it just is only built in a way that you have to implicitly trust the data coming from Workday. And we wanted to make sure that we could sanitize and double check and validate all of that data. And so we were able to sort of put Tines in between both of them, and then also connect build our own database of like what the authoritative source of truth for all the user attributes was in Redshift. And so that was what I was referring to earlier when I was saying we built like a send to story that it just allows us to input a SQL query that will be sent via the AWS API to this Redshift database. So that was really impressive and complicated. That's actually something that we built. So we worked with an engineer at Tines to build, and that was part of the procurement process. It's just really complex, definitely IT specific, not security, and just fun, frankly.
Fun. I love that. Just fun. That's what we want. It's got to be
Yeah.
fun to be building as well. Is there anything else like around what you guys have built that's been helping you with that center of excellence that we should be making sure the rest of the group knows?
I would say, and again, this might sort of reveal what my priorities are like as an IT and security focused individual, but one of the things that and again, this is a new feature that you built for us at our request, was the ability to have credentials that have like dedicated prod versus test versions. So one of the best practices that we like to not only foster but enforce ideally is don't use production credentials in a test story. and people will follow the path of least resistance, right? And they will just do that.
Yeah.
But now that you can set up a single credential but have sort of inside of it nested prod and test versions that will automatically be applied to like when a story runs in test, it uses the test version of the credential. So the end user, or rather the builder, I guess, they don't need to worry about accidentally breaking something by using a production credential when they're testing.
We don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and it's I mean it's a really important best practice, and it's the kind of thing that not everybody thinks about, but it's the kind of thing that for me it keeps me up at night, but now I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I'm sure it keeps other people up at night too. It's not going to just be you worrying about that, but maybe just within your world right now. I wanted to pause for a sec and make sure there was something we had talked about before, because I know you guys have obviously you weren't creating this culture of automation just when you started using Tines. You've been doing this the whole time, and I want to make sure to, do you feel like we talked about that enough? Or were we really, or was Tines really the catalyst for this?
Um, I wouldn't say that is the catalyst. I would say Tines sort of like it unblocked a lot of that latent demand, though, for sure.
Okay.
Because that was the point, is like we had people doing this the wrong way before,
Yeah.
and it allowed us to make the easy path forward for them, also the secure path.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we discussed that.
I think I really like that. That's right. Yeah. You're building things, you're having fun, and you don't even realize it's secure and it's
Right.
following all the best practices,
Yeah.
right?
It's like when you trick your kids into eating their vegetables, like.
Yeah. I love that. What about obviously I would imagine governance and compliance is probably like the key benefit of consolidating all these different automation systems into one. But what about like I know with Intercom and the way you were doing it before, you were kind of in a position where you had a bunch of smaller stories or workflows that you then, when you came over to Times, you were able to move them into one workflow instead of having like 15.
Yeah.
What, like in terms of consolidating in that regard, like what's the main benefit of that? Like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That was something we're very happy to see. And again, depending on who you ask, they'll give you a different answer. Somebody like a financial controller will say, well, we're only paying for one story instead of a dozen. So that's great. For me, I think it makes it easier for the builders because they don't have to wrap their head around, passing logic and information back and forth between all of these stories. They can sort of see it all laid out in front of them visually and intuitively. Like the algorithm is the automation.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, even for like logging, right? Like when maybe you're troubleshooting something or iterating on what you've built, and it's easy to just stay in the same story to look through, your test logs, for example, all in one place. Um, and then I think that also it helps us get around limitations on recursion not being supported in other platforms that we've had in the past too. So basically, because certain vendors don't support recursion, we would have to like build essentially duplicates of the same story that would like pass data back and forth to each other to like trick it into doing recursion. Uh, and when you're doing that, you're like fighting the tool that you're working with, that you know that there's a problem. So it's
Yeah.
nice to not have to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you don't want like when your systems aren't playing nicely, it just creates all
Yeah.
kinds of friction. Nice.
Um, I think I would also say, I know you touched on this very briefly, just consolidating all these automations into a single platform and Tines, it not only does it make it easier for any one builder to automate something, but when one team needs to integrate one of their systems with a system that's owned by another team, if they're already both set up with credentials and Tines, like we can pass that data you know between those systems much easier. We don't have to worry about onboarding another vendor or proofing like API scope, etc. Like if we trust Tines with it, then and they're already both in Tines, then the security audit is done, in my opinion.
Yeah. I imagine that just has such a faster turnaround time on those requests. Like usually as the person asking IT all the time, can I have this tool? Can I get access to this system? If at companies when I wasn't at Times, it would take a long time. You'd have to wait, like you said, for a security audit or something like that, and then to wait for someone to help you integrate the tool and like set up the
Right.
platform with all the different protocols. So I imagine, yeah, teams are a lot happier now
Yeah,
that they,
that's nice. We like being able to say yes, like,
yeah.
um, and the teams themselves, for the most part, like they're the ones who own these systems throughout the company. Most systems are not owned by IT itself, so like they're the owners, they're the subject matter experts. Like they know how best to automate things. Like we're just there to make sure that there's a secure platform, and once Tines has been vetted once, like the job is done.
How many teams do y'all have on Tines today?
I don't know off the top of my head. Not a ton. I think we were licensed for only like 10, so less than that. I'm not sure. Probably
Yeah,
between 5 and 10. And
that's really
we've definitely we've made teams that are not super granular, right? Because people through like larger organizations, like departments, for
Yeah.
example, might want to use Tines, and it logically makes sense for us to say, okay, well, we'll make a team in Tines for this entire like sales department, and then that way, smaller teams within sales, they can interact with each other in that sales department team in Tines. If we wanted to, or if we perhaps had a obligation to, segregate all of these teams in a very granular way, then we might have the same number of automations that we have today, but maybe, twice as many teams or more. But luckily, yeah, we haven't needed that many teams.
Oh, that's nice. But it's nice that you're able to still bring all those folks into the platform because you have those granular roles. So you're not worried about anyone breaking anything or
Exactly.
moving things around that they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Nice. And did you want to show a story today? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I'm happy to show the same story we talked about before in the case study that we did. I think maybe that is because that I know that one's approved to show public links. So.
Awesome. Yeah, let's look at one of your stories and give the folks a view into just how intuitive it has been for you and how it's easy for someone to consume.
Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm happy to just walk through this story and show the example. So this is a perfect example of how we have multiple entry points, right? So we have multiple webhooks. So one, when a CrowdStrike detection itself happens, starts this chain of actions, and then there's also that'll send a Slack message to the user depending on the detection, and then depending on how the user responds to that Slack message, it'll push a button in it, and then it'll be this other separate entry point through this action. But again, you can see it all laid out in front of you in a single story, which is great. This is probably our simplest example of multiple entry points. I mean, I'm happy to even walk through step by step, but basically, we're setting up some environment variables that just help us parameterize how to integrate with GitHub, for example, and Slack. And then we're just checking to only continue if the event is of a certain type and has certain characteristics. Then we're looking up that endpoint in CrowdStrike, and then we're looking up that same asset in Unitza for inventorying purposes to find the user it's assigned to. And we're creating an issue in GitHub, and then we're posting a message to our IT channel in Slack. And then we're also doing some logic here to determine if the asset is assigned to a user, and if it's low priority, then if those are both true, we'll find that user in Slack by their email address, and then we'll Slack that user if they're found. And then the user can respond to that Slack message, which brings us back up here. And then we remove the buttons from the Slack message because obviously we only want them responding a single time per incident. And the button, basically there'll be two options, the buttons, depending on the incident severity. So if it's what we categorize as like lower than P1, for example, in CrowdStrike, then we give the user the opportunity to say, oh, like actually this was just me, like this is expected, and then we don't worry about it. But if they escalate it, then we just keep the incident as is, we update the GitHub issue, and we let the user know that that's been taken care of. But I think here is assuming that they did escalate it, right? We're going to continue. Okay, so we'll let them know that it's been escalated. We'll comment on the GitHub issue to update that it's been escalated, label it accordingly because, okay, it needs to be escalated. We'll label it as such. And then we're going to find the PagerDuty schedule, I think this is. Oh, actually, you know what? I think since we published this, we moved from PagerDuty to Incident.io, but it's the same kind of logic. So I'm pretty sure this has been updated for Incident.io, but same concept. And then we get the Incident.io on call schedule. Yeah, there it is. Get user on call from Incident.io. And through some event transform actions, we compose an incident summary and create an incident in Incident.io. And then we send a Slack message about it as well in IT general. Yeah. As well as direct to the user.
So out of curiosity, how long was the process? How long would it have taken you to move over to Incident.io from PagerDuty before and now in Tines? How quickly were you able to do it?
I mean, it's hard to say because we didn't do it before moving to Tines. But I think what I can say confidently is that before Tines, the answer would be it depends, right?
Okay.
So it depends on, is there like a pre-built integration, for instance, at Dio in this other platform? If the
Right.
answer is yes, then it might be quick. If not, then it could be more complicated.
Right.
But I don't know, times just everything is just, an API call effectively. Like if you can write a curl command, then you can make an action in times.
Yeah.
So actions can be like fungible in a way. Yeah, and in
Yeah.
any event, that's what the story looks like. I can
And then it's updating both Slack, like it's updating the Slack threads that you started as well
yeah.
as the individual user in Slack. And it's making sure GitHub's all aligned with what you've done as well.
Yep. Yeah. So it's Slack, GitHub, Incident.io, also integrating with CrowdStrike itself, obviously, to get the alert and to get metadata about the endpoint, as well as who needs to get who it's assigned to. So
Hey.
a lot of integrations in a tight little story.
Yeah. I was so surprised at how many in such a small space. That's awesome though. Because it seems like it's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole point is right to helpful is exactly the word to use here, because it's significantly reducing the noise, right, in that signal noise ratio. Like, so when we do get an alert and it is escalated, we know that it's real, instead of creating that notification fatigue where everybody's just so used to seeing these alerts all the time, they just ignore them and they're trained to ignore them even when it is a real incident.
Right.
And I think that really is the overarching goal of this particular story, right? Is like make it so when you get an alert, you know that it's worth replying to.
Right. Gosh, makes an impact.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was really nice to get to see and hear and understand how you guys are doing this. And hopefully it's relatable to other people on the call as well.
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
It seems like something a lot of people deal with is like that alert fit. I mean, even personally, the alert fatigue when you
Yeah,
have just too many things coming in at once. And it's like, which one of these actually matters right now?
yeah, you definitely don't want to train your users to ignore important alerts, for sure.
Exactly. 100%. All right, folks, we're going to head straight into the Q&A now. If you don't mind, put your questions into the little question box there on your screen, and we'll be happy to answer any of them as they come through. Awesome. So it looks like we have a couple coming through already. One of them was asking about how they're using Tines for some of their IT use cases, and their strategy is kind of similar to yours, Lucas, it sounds like, where one of their questions was, how are you approaching documentation for your more complicated workflows? Is the workflow itself the living documentation, or do you have anything with export and or save as image, for example?
This is a really good question. And I think this question probably came in before we demoed that last story. So maybe in the screen sharing, you might have seen there's a little bit of documentation in there. And, we make sometimes heavy use of the notes functionality to, right alongside the actions to add a note describing what things do. That's maybe it depends on who you ask. I mean, me personally, I'm a strong proponent of like documentation as code as well. So like the code should be the documentation. It should be self-explanatory. But yeah, as stories get more complicated, that'll only get you so far. We haven't used the ability to export stories as images yet. I think that's really cool. We've done analogous like flowcharts with algorithms before for our other documentation. So it's a good reminder. Maybe we should start doing that. But yeah, I mean, the good news is, Tines has lots of options. So whatever we need.
Nice. All right, let's pick another one. So you might have already answered this a little bit, but what are processes that you built in place or put in place that give you the confidence for this no-code developer community that you've built internally?
Yeah, a very good question. And I definitely will go back to just reiterating again, like at Intercom, there definitely is this strong, healthy engineering culture that focuses on these very security-minded best practices. And I mean, to be frank, when we were first investigating Tines and decided initially not to get it before we ended up migrating to Tines, like there were a couple of those best practices that Tines didn't support yet. But like over the course of that next year, you really sort of met us in the middle and really built all of these things out for us to allow us to effectively enforce those practices. So I just rattle them off again off the top of my head. Role-based access control, least privilege, granular permissions, custom roles. Maybe one of the things I haven't discussed yet would be like a specific example might be you built for us the ability for us to carve out a specific permission for credential management. So, we want to be able to, for example, have IT or the owners of Tines, we manage the credentials and set them up for users. And that's like part of the process of onboarding a new vendor to integrate with Tines. But once that's done, then the users can use those credentials when they're building stories to do literally whatever they want. It's like a sandbox, they have free reign. So yeah, I mean, Tines has shown just an incredible amount of flexibility and willingness to, like I said, meet us in the middle and build out the functionality we need for those best practices.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Another one is around that you mentioned other people are building automations with you. So who else is building with you on your team?
Yeah, on my team, I guess the short answer would be everybody.
That's awesome.
we have 3 engineers, myself included, and we're all building automations sometimes frequently. But we do also have other non-engineering folks on the IT infrastructure team, managers, TPM, stuff like that. And they have also spent time working in Tines. And that's, what's so nice about it is like, it's not just a tool for engineers, but if you are an engineer and very technically minded, you can get really low level and as deep as you need in whatever technical tasks you have.
That's awesome. All right, looks like we have one more here on how do you manage on-call shifts and incidents if everyone is building at the same time?
Well, I would say, really, I would turn this question on its head. I would say, frankly, not everyone is building at the same time. But Tines really is what enables us to do that, right? So like, if we didn't have Tines, we would be forced to be building all the time. And then we would really be out of luck because we would also have other responsibilities, right? So like something would have to go in the back burner and something still does go in the back burner, but at least like Tines allows us, I don't think there's really such thing as a 10x engineer, but like Tines kind of allows you to pretend like you're a 10x engineer. You get some of those benefits perhaps. And yeah, we have all sorts of other responsibilities and processes that we can do without being stuck automating because Tines, makes things 10 times as fast.
Oh, nice. Love that. That's what we want to hear from everybody who's using it. So that's great. I'm not sure if we want to give everyone just another second or two to see if any more questions come through, but it might be the end there. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone who was able to join us today. If you have other questions that you come up with or you have for us. Oh, wait, one more just slid in. Let's see. Okay, so the question is, it's very cool you have different teams and team types. Do you do anything beyond the Tines created training for enabling folks to build in Tines? For example, I've been curious about creating private templates for shared use and wondering if you use those or anything similar.
We have built internal templates. Like for example, I mentioned earlier, we made like or even a send a story, like to send SQL queries via the AWS API. I don't think we've built any that we've like put in a library for other teams to use, or maybe we have, and I'm just ignorant of it. But not myself personally yet. But that's a really good idea. One thing that I did, and I'm just going to mention here on the call, is I asked, because I think that the Tines University is very useful. And so we do have like an internal Tines user guide. And whenever we, as part of our access request platform, when someone requests access to Tines, when we grant it, we also send them to our internal Tines user guide, which also mentions Tines University. And we say, like, please make sure you complete at least one course in Tines University. And I've internally told our team at Tines, like, I would love it if I could force people to complete a Tines University course before they're even allowed to build in our Tines org. But you haven't done that for us yet. Maybe that's a little controversial, but.
You can always create a workflow to do that, right? You can always build a story that could gate.
I'm sure you could like kick people out of a team, like if they don't have proof of completing Tines University, like upload your certificate here.
Yeah, it's such a good resource that I found the university to be, even how I learned how to
Yeah.
use Tines. It's really approachable. All right, let's see. Someone might be typing something up for us. It's good questions here today. I feel like that's been fun. Being mindful of time, though, I'm going to go ahead and call it, but because we really appreciate everyone who's able to join today. We love the questions. I know I did. I'm sure Lucas, that was fun for you as well.
Yeah.
And we hope to do more of this in the future. So thank you so much, Lucas, for your time and for your experience. It's been great to
My
share.
pleasure. Yeah, it was really fun. Love talking about Tines, just talking shop.
It's the best. Same. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.